Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Before we introduce the speaker, I want to make a few brief announcements. We know many of you are listening in from far away and can't attend local events or programs. That's why we provide this free webinar series. We host multiple webinars per month. Simply visit our website at www.johnson-center.org and click on the webinars link on the right-hand side. New webinars and events are often added, so if you're not on our email list, I encourage you to visit our website and click on the Join Our Email List link that appears on the homepage. We have many great summer events coming up, including free family fun, sibling summer camps, and social skills groups. To get instant news and events from the Johnson Center, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, as we often announce grant and scholarship opportunities, research opportunities, and last-minute events and presentations there. Be sure to follow our colleagues at the Autism Research Institute as they host their own webinar initiative, and they share some great resources on their website and social media pages. Before we begin the presentation, please note that questions may be typed into the control panel throughout the presentation, and time permitting, they will be addressed during the presentation. Also, for those who have requested copies of the presentation, we don't send out presentation slides. However, we do post recordings of all of our free webinars on the Johnson Center YouTube channel, found on YouTube/The Johnson Center, with no spaces, and subscribe to get full access to all of our recorded webinars. If you would like a certificate of attendance after today's webinar, look for a follow-up email in your mailbox one after the webinar concludes. It will contain instructions on how to download your certificate. Now, please welcome today's presenter, Kelly Barnhill. Kelly Barnhill is the Clinical Director at the Johnson Center for Child Health and Development. She is a certified clinical nutritionist with almost 15 years of experience working with nutrition in children with autism and related disorders. At the Johnson Center, she directs a multidisciplinary team that has served thousands of children, and she is a critical member of our research team. In addition to her work at the Johnson Center, Kelly has served as a nutrition coordinator for the Autism Research Institute for several years, and she is a sought-after presenter, speaking at several national and international conferences each year. Please welcome Kelly Barnhill.
Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm here to talk to you in this hour about strategies to support sleep and relaxation in your household. My primary focus will be on taking care of yourself as an adult, but note that throughout the presentation I'll be offering tips that are really beneficial for all of us that you can also apply with your children. Clearly, for any of those things that are appropriate to children or specifically to any individual that require dosing, you'll want to work with a practitioner to help in that regard. So just to start, I want to talk a little bit about this article that appeared in the New York Times last month called Sleep is the New Status Symbol. I think you can find it pretty easily. It was published on April 8th, but it really looked at sleep as we've been talking about it in this community for quite some time, and it outlines, in addition to the nutrition and exercise and other lifestyle choices that we need to make, some of the issues, some of the science surrounding concerns about sleep now in our society, and two, things that are on the cutting edge of doing it because it's become trendy to look at your sleep and focus on sleep. So today, really, I've budgeted about 35 or 40 minutes to talk through my slides. My primary focus is on food and supplements. I touch on exercise, and the remainder of the time I'm happy to answer any specific questions because, as I mentioned, this is a pretty global view, and I'm happy to speak to specifics if there's time. I want to give you an overview of sleep and health in general and what happens and why it's important that we sleep. I want to look at some reasonable dietary approaches that maximize our health status in general, and then what we can do from a dietary and supplement perspective to enhance sleep specifically. And then I can field questions on any specifics that you might have. So just globally, this is a slide that I like to refer to so that we can all think about what's happening while we're sleeping so that our brain can do its job well. And that's really important both from a caregiver perspective so that we can make the best choices in taking care of our families, and also from a child's perspective, because I'm a real adherent to that sleep time schedule for all children so that their brains can rest at night and recuperate. And so what happens when we're doing that? All the different parts of our brain are doing different things. And what happens if our sleep diminishes, or we don't get consistent sleep, or our children don't get enough sleep overnight? Well, the frontal lobe focuses on creative thinking, for example. And so the impact there, you'll note on the slide, could be the inability to focus. It could cause stuttering. It could cause the inability to function on your toes, essentially. From the parietal lobe perspective, we're simply looking at the inability to work through logical problem-solving skills. From a temporal lobe perspective, the impact there is on speech and speech habits primarily. The prefrontal cortex, definite issue, and there's a lot of research in this area right now, particularly in pediatrics and adolescents, looking at the impact of sleep and lack of sleep on judgment and impulsivity, and I think that's really important to mention here. And then the neocortex, that's where we're laying down memory, and that's how we learn new things. And as children, it makes it hard for us to learn things initially, and as adults, making those connections to things that we've been exposed to, and both with memory recall and also laying down memory, is difficult. So that just kind of gives you a big picture perspective on what happens when we're sleeping and all the different portions of your brain that are involved. So from a biochemical perspective, what's happening in there? Well, the main component that's happening when your brain rests and your body is doing its job is to clear out a daytime buildup of something called adenosine, which then allows you to wake up feeling focused, alert, and without that brain fog that builds up over time during the day. It also allows for growth and healing and maintenance of immune health. And finally, sleep promotes mood. And if we have erratic sleep patterns or incomplete sleep patterns or a decrease in the amount of overall sleep that we're getting, our mood is definitely impacted. So beyond that and those biochemical things, I touched on this before, but these are all of the functions and the things that are happening while we're sleeping as well. From a cognitive support perspective, we're laying down those memories so that we can bring them back in the future. We are working on both fact memories, so when we're teaching our children math facts, for example, those facts are solidifying during the sleep process, and from a procedural perspective, they know how to do things as well through this process, and that's how those memories are set. How much do we need? Well, I have lots of data on this, and I'm happy to share both pediatric and adolescent information with you. From a pediatric perspective, I think we all know as parents that until a child is about 9 or 10 years old, and as they develop, all children develop differently, clearly, and as adults, we all require different amounts of sleep as well, but in general, a child needs 12-ish hours of sleep minimum to the age of about 8, and that is actually a decrease over earlier time points. So typically until a child is 4 or 5, they need about 14 hours, and that really constitutes an 11.5 overnight sleep and also an afternoon nap. And then as we age, our sleep cycles change, so definitely through adolescence our sleep cycles change. Our brains are wired to function later into the night. That's why those adolescents stay up so late. But they still require lots of sleep. So they need 9 to 10, 11 hours of sleep every night. And that's problematic because their brains aren't ready to rest until much later. And they still have to be up really early for school. And I think some school districts are finally kind of getting that and starting high school later and later into the day. But really, our adolescents still need a lot of sleep. It's just on a different cycle. And for adults, we really need 7 to 9 hours a night. Some need less than that, and some need more. And about a third of us sleep less than 6 hours a night, which is huge. You know, you'll meet people who say they need less than 6 hours a night of sleep, and for some, very few, that might be the case, and the rest of us have just adjusted to what that pattern looks like. And so my strategies here are to help you identify both how much sleep you need and help to support that for you on an individual basis. So what happens as adults if we are sleep deprived? You look tired and drowsy, you fall asleep right as you put your head on the pillow because you're so exhausted, or you can't go to sleep at all. You have reduced mental alertness. There's a risk of obesity, heart disease, and diabetes that increases for both the acuteness of your sleep deprivation and also the chronicity of your sleep deprivation. There's poor hand-eye coordination. Touched on this one a few times now. Poor concentration and focus. And you have microsleeps. So you fall asleep for a short period of time and wake up, and it's not a restful, peaceful sleep. So what's happening from a cognitive perspective without this? Well, your neurons cannot coordinate the information that you're taking in. You can't make decisions with that information, therefore, because your judgment's impaired. You lack the ability to assess a situation, and you cannot perform to your best abilities. Your muscles and your organs are often out of sync, and that speaks a lot to I guess your metabolism being off as well, because you get hungry at the wrong hours, and you're doing your body really is functioning in a suboptimal place. And our job really is to help you get sleep back on track. So I've touched on each of these, but in a nutshell, we need to sleep because from a biochemical perspective, the impact on both our short-term and long-term health is huge. So what happens and what can drive sleep concerns? Well, it's really interesting for me because we often look at adults with sleep issues and think that they need some help and support from a medical perspective. And so there are several prescriptions that have been out for a decade or more now that specifically address sleep on one of two pathways primarily. But the reality, an unfortunate reality, is that there are so many different variables that can impact our brain's ability to rest and sleep and rejuvenate that we don't have medical intervention to address all of those things. And you have to step back and kind of address it from a big picture perspective to see what's driving the sleeplessness and address that particularly. So I'm certainly not criticizing the use of any prescription medications, and I'm thinking of Lunesta or Ambien specifically, because they are researched in 2 or 3 particular circumstances. So jet lag, for example, it can be really beneficial to use medical intervention for short-term issues, but from a longer-term perspective, all of these factors can weigh into your body's ability to shut down, your brain's ability to sleep. And unless we're targeting exactly the right one, you might be trying a prescription agent that is not targeted appropriately. It won't work and you'll give up. And so I really feel like we need a big picture perspective on which avenue is the most appropriate one before we start handing out prescription medication or other fairly significant interventions without full understanding and the data to tell us what might be driving it. So from a nutrition perspective, what do we need to be thinking about in order to maximize our ability to go to sleep and stay asleep? Well, the first step for me is always thinking about whole, healthy dietary components, balanced meals, nutritious meals, snacks throughout the day if your brain needs them, and eating too little, recognizing that not eating enough is going to impact your ability to sleep, and eating too much and eating not a little or too much of the wrong things can also play a role in what's happening. Understanding what your own specific dietary needs are. So are you responding to a particular food that should be eliminated, or do you have a documented lactose intolerance, for example? Understanding those and understanding the roles that those responses might have on an individual level in terms of dietary impact is also important. And then there are the big things, and I'll touch on them a little bit later, but the things that have been researched that we know about. Alcohol, certainly, it has a sedative impact ultimately after sort of this supportive impact early on, and caffeine, which we know has sleep inhibiting properties. So to be clear, and I know that this is not the primary focus of our talk today, so I just want to touch on it, and I'll go through it quickly, and I'm happy to answer specific questions if necessary. But for me, when I talk about what a basic healthy diet looks like, it means plenty of water. So choosing enough water to keep your body hydrated throughout the day for 24 hours. Not taking in too much water that you're getting up to use the restroom at night, but making sure that you're consuming that fluid throughout the day so that you are amply hydrated going into the night. Looking at whole unprocessed foods, so anything that looks like it's been grown or raised, really, is how some people in this community refer to it. I encourage you to look at the writings of Mark Bittman or Michael Pollan for direction on other perspectives on this specifically and how to build a healthy whole food-based diet. From a macronutrient perspective, for me, that means lots of fresh fruits and vegetables in terms of carbohydrates, lots of complex carbohydrates when available, healthy protein. If you're choosing animal protein, look for organic. Sometimes, if it's possible, local grass-fed if it's not available. Free-range poultry, free-range eggs, plant protein from healthy legumes and grains, making sure that you're including all the healthy fats in your diet that you need. So omega-6s, omega-9s, omega-3s are also important. Looking at the reasonable use of saturated fats such as coconut oil or red palm oil is good. So that's really the premise, and that's what we spend a lot of time talking to our clients about and counseling them through. This is the package and what we should see in your diet overall. But what should we not see there? Ideally, your diet shouldn't contain any packaged or processed foods. So that means, you know, no chips, no crackers, no candy, no soda. Ideally, no pre-prepared frozen meals because of the preservatives that are included in them. I think that our options for healthy frozen meals have increased greatly over the past few years, and you can find brands that lack all of the chemicals that we have concerns about in terms of additives and preservatives on the shelves now, with also healthy, wholesome ingredients. So in a pinch, I think that's a good thing to know about and look for. No refined flours, no refined sugars. Avoidance of all things like hydrogenated fats. And while our retail supply, we can no longer buy products that contain hydrogenated fats. From a wholesale supply, so from a restaurant supply, there are manufacturers, you're still allowed to use that, which can be problematic. Avoid MSG, artificial colors, flavors, sweeteners. preservatives, and ideally, if you're looking for fresh produce, look for things that are fertilizer and pesticide free. So just a small list there, and I don't want to give you the illusion that all of us have to attain that 100% mark all of the time, because I don't think that's reality, and I think that every day in each of our lives we are faced with circumstances and choices where either a healthy option isn't available or we want to indulge, and in either of those cases it's okay, because none of us is perfect. And while I feel like this is a good roadmap and a blueprint that should guide us, it's not the be-all and end-all, and it's certainly not, it doesn't mean that it should be adhered to strictly. If it takes, and if you make mistakes, recognize that's okay. So just to summarize what I said a moment ago about what we should be eating, perfect slide to take a photo of or hold for future reference, because this really speaks to all of those components that I mentioned. Also, I've added a note here about bringing in some other healthy components of dietary benefit. So fermented foods are one of those. If you are a family that consumes dairy products, or if you individually choose dairy products, yogurts, kefirs, non-dairy yogurts and kefirs, things like kombucha, kimchi, other fermented vegetables, sprouted grains, so grains that have had their, that have been sprouted, allowing some of the lectins to be, and oxalates to be compromised so that you can get to the nutrition that's found inside the grain is good. And homemade broths such as beef broth, beef bone broth, chicken broth, those are all great because they provide gelatin and other minerals for us that it's harder and harder to find in our diets on a daily basis. So next question for me really is, what should we be eating for sleep specifically? So we want to target sleep with both diet and supplements. And what does that look like? Well, the research bears out a few things, not much, but number one, in terms of a sleep-eat cycle, the research tells us that avoiding food roughly 3 hours before bedtime allows your GI tract to process it sufficiently to be in a place where it won't be interfering with restful sleep. I know some people who, and with our young children too, even if there's a 5 o'clock bedtime or a 5 o'clock dinner and bedtime is 7:30, that's okay. Just know that for all of us, that transit time, that motility issue is roughly 3 hours. Some of us it's less than that, some of us it's more than that, but that's what the research tells us right now. There's also research out there that looks at combining carbohydrates and proteins when you're snacking, and that bears one on blood sugar concerns throughout the day, but also if you need if you're one of those individuals who just craves a bedtime snack and feels like they need a bedtime snack to sleep well, don't just grab those easy to digest carbs, the cupcake that's left on the table from dessert, for example. You need something with protein too to maximize and support sleep throughout the night. The research also tells us that alcohol interferes with sleep, and that caffeine interferes with sleep, and fatty, fried, spicy foods are also implicated as sleep disruptors. And I will say, I had someone, I was talking about this just recently, and there was a gentleman in the audience who raised his hand and said, but wait, it sounds like you're really down on caffeine, and you're really negative about it and discouraging people from consuming caffeine. And but I think and his point was the research doesn't really bear that out. And my response to him was, please don't get me wrong, I love a coffee. I love a good cup of coffee. The issue is, when does it become problematic? And the research tells us that 3 cups of coffee a day in general is a nice threshold to understand, to be at a safe intake limit. 6 cups of coffee a day becomes problematic in terms of bodily functions over time for many individuals. The research kind of defines both of those things. It also tells us that it takes a body 6 to 8 hours to process and get rid of the impact and influence of that caffeine intake. But that does not mean that I'm encouraging all of us to eliminate caffeine completely. I'm just sharing with you the parameters and what we know from the data. And from a foods perspective, really, the primary concern with fatty and fried foods is that, in general, based on what they are and what they are fried in, they are more difficult to digest. They will linger in the stomach longer and therefore impact the ability to sleep through that process. So what can you eat and what can you do to sleep better? Well, we know that high potassium foods have an impact. Potassium is important for sleep, and some potassium foods that you might think about would be squashes, both summer squash and winter squash, so zucchini as well as butternut squash, sweet and white potatoes. And I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Sally Fallon and Nourishing Traditions. There's actually a potassium broth recipe that she recommends and encourages for people who are trying to support potassium levels, and there is a recipe in that cookbook that you can also Google and find online if you really want to focus on adding potassium in to your diet. White beans such as navy or pea beans and cannellini are also supportive. Whole milk, high quality yogurt can be beneficial, but you don't want to choose a yogurt product that has lots of sugar added or lots of other things added, because that really is detrimental to the components that you're looking for. And then things like orange juice, cantaloupe, and bananas are also higher potassium foods. Gelatin might be a good supportive product as well. There's a brand called Vital Nutrients that makes a powdered collagen that is beneficial. Other collagen products out there, Dr. Josh Axe has a great collagen powder. He makes a bone broth powder now too that could be helpful. And finally, from a dietary consumption perspective, there is research out there supporting the consumption of warm drinks later in the evening prior to bedtime, as both as there is a psychological component, and there is research out there looking at that and the impact psychologically on consuming something warm before bedtime. And then there are teas like valerian tea or sleepy time tea, chamomile tea, which are primarily herb-based and have been researched in their benefits at relaxation and sleep support. So what about from a nutritional supplement perspective? What does that look like in terms of sleep? You want to make sure the basics are covered first, so I always tell families, think about a whole food supplement for yourself as well as your children, particularly if you're not getting 9 to 13 reasonable servings of vegetables and fruits a day. There are a number of good quality products out there. I've just listed a few of them here on this slide, but that lets us know that you're getting all those micronutrients in that you need from that whole food, broad-based diet that I mentioned earlier. And I think that's important twofold. One, because very few of us really get those targeted amounts of vegetables and fruits in that we need, so we're lacking in that nutrition overall. And with our children, some of them never get that much in or even close to that into their bodies, and we don't know what they're lacking because many of the things that are included in a whole food supplement haven't been studied, and they are synergistic and operate with the other micronutrients that we do know about to maximize their effect in the body. So beyond that, I recommend a basic nutritional supplement for all of us. And that's primarily because even though we might be getting enough food in, for example, if we fall into that category of people who actually do eat a reasonable amount of carbs through vegetables and fruits, and have a broad-based, balanced macronutrient intake, the likelihood that we can digest and absorb all of that food, and the likelihood that it has or contains all of the nutrition that we'd hope for, is lower than we'd like. So to be safe, I like to recommend a multivitamin for each of us too. I've listed some here as well. I want to mention that to get a quality multivitamin product in, to make sure you're broad-based and across the board and you have any deficits addressed, it's probably not going to be one pill a day. And it can be something as simple as one pill 3 times a day, and I think a couple of those that I listed here are there. Or it could be something more complex, like that Pro Thrivers series that I mentioned. Pro Thrivers is a great product line, I think, for adults and particularly caregivers who might have a compromised nutrition health status, because it does address many different areas of health, and it is an entire series of products, as it were. So there's a product for cognitive health, there's a product for overall multivitamin nutritional support, there is a product specifically to address sleep, and I think all of those taken together, for my experiences, for our clients who come in and feel like they're in a place where they need significant lifestyle change, that series is a good place to start looking and then back off or reevaluate over time. Essential fatty acids, from a cognitive place, from a sleep perspective, I think that all of us need ample EFAs, omega-3s every day. From a GI status place, I think that the use of probiotics is important, particularly in times of immune status, immune system compromise, and also when you've been using antibiotic coverage for treatment of an infection. I've listed a number of different options here for you, but there are other good quality vitamins out there as well. And then I want to take some time to talk about supplements that you can specifically use for sleep. Unfortunately, the research out there in this area is limited, but what do we know? Magnesium is highly calming as a nutrient, and there are a number of different forms of magnesium out there that are available. One that we've had great success with, both with clients who are children and also their parents, is a simple magnesium citrate form that is marketed under the label Natural Calm. It is highly effective, and I am very pleased with it as a product. Some families have difficulty getting kids to consume it because it's a powder that you mix with a warm liquid and it dissolves. But it's very helpful, and if you can choose the right flavor, because there are lots of flavors now, mix it with a warm liquid and drink it as a tea at bedtime, for example, or mix it, let it cool, and then add it to another liquid that your child does prefer or could prefer. That can be helpful to get it in as well. It's also supportive of GI motility, so you need to be careful not to give too much of that, because it is the same ingredient that you use to address constipation symptoms. Other things that have been researched and used, melatonin has received a lot of attention in this area. We are only just touching really on the role that melatonin plays in both the kids that we treat, I think, and also the population in general. But we know that melatonin is an antioxidant. We know that it helps with health of the GI tract. We know that it promotes production of serotonin, and therefore impacts sleep. We, in the past and in general, have the best results with a small dose in a timed release form for most of the clients that we work with. Choosing the melatonin that you go with is important, I think. Pulling something off the shelf without a clear understanding of what its mechanism of action is and how it works can lead you to believe that all melatonin can't help, and I don't believe that to be the case, because most of the kids that we work with, if it's dosed correctly and respected, have a positive response to the use of melatonin. Other things that people talk about, lavender has been researched. There's a lot of work in the European community looking at lavender for a calming and sleep support perspective, support approach specifically. The downside, I guess, and the caution that I give you with that use of lavender is that it has been researched as a complicating factor and when you're talking about prepubescent and adolescent males. So I strongly encourage families to look at the literature on it when you choose to use a lavender product for yourself, because it comes encapsulated, but I would not use that or recommend it for a male child or adolescent that I'm working with at this time. Another product that we've had great success with is something called Cortisol Manager, which is made by Integrative Therapeutics. This is a component of a larger package that Integrative makes that is really comprehensive HPA axis support, which looks at adrenal function and cortisol levels. And the beauty of Cortisol Manager, I think, is that its primary components are what we call adaptogens, and that means that it just allows your body to settle and moderate on its own. So it's not promoting production of anything, and it's not inhibiting production of anything. It's allowing your body to maximize its ability to do its job well. And I use this product with many parents that I work with, and when it's used correctly, I think it provides huge benefit for some sleep-deprived parents immediately. And then I think there's the issue of essential oils. We hear more and more about essential oils in our community these days, and for me, I think it's beneficial to use them. And there's a little bit of research out there that we have access to. There are companies that are promoting use of their oils now and are providing some limited work supporting their claims. But in general, the work that I've read out of Europe looks at lavender diffusion, not lavender taken orally, which I mentioned earlier, and chamomile diffusion as options for support. There's also a blended product called Peace and Calming that I've found to be helpful with some families as well. And I want to touch on this specifically because one thing that, and this is outside the scope of really what I've been talking about in terms of diet and also nutrition, but exercise is the #1 research component to have the strongest and most solid impact for improving both cognitive health and performance and also sleep. So I just want to say, as parents, as caregivers, and also really for our children, you have to move your body. And at a minimum, it needs to be 60 minutes a week, broken up over time, aerobic activity as well as strength building activities. And prioritize it and prioritize yourself, please. There are really easy ways to do that now. From our Fitbits to our phones, which have lots of apps on them. The 7-Minute Workout app is one that I'm familiar with that allows you to incorporate that with other things that you're doing. There's also, there are several yoga apps now that help both with exercise and also with bringing meditation and that mindfulness component into what you're doing. And that's really all I want to say about exercise. I just want to say that it's this huge piece out there that gets ignored in a nutrition talk, but it really has the most impact on this specific issue that I'm talking about today. So the last thing that I really want to spend a little bit of time talking about before we go to questions is thinking about lifestyle modifications so that you can sleep like a baby, so that you're as peaceful and relaxed, both as a parent and also looking at older children. What do you do? How do you address the choices that you're making? Reduce your anxiety and your stimulants. So practice that meditation that I was talking about. Be careful about your caffeine. Drink your water during the day to make sure you're amply hydrated, but stop drinking well in advance of bedtime so that you're not compelled to get up throughout the night. Think about Epsom salt baths for yourself. Main component is magnesium sulfate. I mentioned magnesium citrate earlier, but that magnesium in the bath, while it's also a calming and peaceful experience, the magnesium actually enters your body transdermally and can be beneficial for relaxation as well. Be careful about artificial light in your bedroom. Try to minimize that or eliminate it completely if you can. And if you need a white noise machine because you're in a noisier environment and having white noise in the background could help you or your child, I strongly encourage you to think about adding that to your benefit. What else? When we talk about this, and you can find some good presentations online about sleep hygiene, choosing a regular bedtime and a regular bedtime routine is important for all of us, not just our children. What can that include? Could include a bath, it could include books, it could include reading for adults. Create a healthy sleep environment. So this one's a really tough one because we rely on our handheld technology so much these days, but I strongly encourage you either to keep your iPhone and your iPad out of your room or to put it away after you've used it and move it out of your bedroom area into another portion of the house. If you're a very light sleeper, you can think about eye covers if you're not bothered by things like that, or you can think about blackout shades to really create a dark environment in your bedroom. You want to keep your room cooler, not warmer, because we know that cooler temperatures are beneficial for a more sound sleep. And ideally no pets. That's a tough one, but they do compromise our sleep status. And if you're at a place in your life where your sleep is highly compromised, I would say to you, if you could arrange another place for your dog or your cat to sleep, just short-term even, you might see some benefit there. Try to wake up at the same time every day. Clearly, a small swing once or twice a week, so a Friday night, a Sunday night, those nights, that's okay. But in general, your body gets into a cycle for a reason, and small swings can be okay if they're one-offs. When it's a completely erratic pattern or it's just chaos in terms of when bedtime is and when wake time is, your brain and your body just can't keep up. And finally, nap only when needed, because naps are a great thing in my opinion, but really they should be employed not every day unless you're in a cycle where that's just you need 20 minutes every afternoon. But don't feel like you shouldn't evaluate your circumstances if you're entirely sleepy and you can't function at 1:30 or 2 in the afternoon every day. So that's everything that I wanted to go over today. I think, look at that, I think I hit it right at about 45 minutes. That leaves us a little bit of time for questions. I see a few coming in now. So the first one I have is, can you explain some more examples of fermented foods? And yes, in general, fermenting has become more and more accessible and available for all of us, both commercially, so you can walk into the grocery store and have 3 choices of kombucha, which is just a fermented tea that has lots and lots of probiotic cultures in it. Or you can find fermented vegetables, and when I go into my local natural grocer, there's a line of fermented carrots and fermented cucumbers and fermented asparagus. So I have lots of choices there. But if you're someone who is intrigued by the idea of fermenting, and that's really, that just allows cultures of good bacteria to grow in there. There's an author whose name is Sandor Katz, K-A-T-Z, and he's done several books on fermentation. I think the most recent one that I have seen was called Wild Fermentation, which talks about how to choose things growing in the wild or in your garden to ferment to your benefit. So those are really other fermented foods are things that are cultured, like kefirs and yogurts. Another good question we have here is, can you get addicted to melatonin? And the research doesn't bear out that once you start using melatonin, you have to use it because your body stops producing it itself. That's just not the case. Perhaps 15 or 20 years ago, there was a little bit of data out that suggested that the healthiest way to use melatonin would be to pulse use it. So use it for a few days as you need it and then take a few days off. But that's really not been borne out in the literature either. I think rather what we've learned is melatonin has some specific uses to reset the body clock. So it's been researched and used for people crossing time zones. So jet lag, it's a key component of beating jet lag and addressing jet lag and resetting quickly for people who've had, who work a shift work. For example, where they're back and forth between different shifts during the day, melatonin can be helpful there. I think that other things that melatonin has been looked at, and in general clinically with the children that we see, we know they've been in a chronic state. If we're recommending something that will maximize sleep, we know they've been struggling with sleep for a long time, and so our use there is to intervene and break the pattern of I guess sleeplessness, their inability to go to sleep or their inability to stay asleep, and by interrupting that with minimal melatonin support over the short term, and then after 3 to 6 months of use, reevaluating for its need. So removing it and seeing if it is still needed to support from a neurotransmitter perspective. Then we can add it back in if necessary. So I think the answer, that's a long-winded way to say, I think the answer to the question is no. You can't, there's no evidence that we have that says you can get addicted to melatonin. Other questions are, what do you do when snoring interrupts your sleep? And I think that's a great question. Number one, from looking at it two different ways, as the most important thing really is, as the snorer, I think it needs to be evaluated, because you could be looking at something that's more difficult and dangerous, like sleep apnea or significant sleep apnea, which in that process of apnea, your brain really can't clear all that adenosine because it's constantly waking up. And so you aren't getting to the place where your body can do all the healing it needs to do overnight. So if you have a significant sleep apnea concern, you're waking up and you're not well rested, you don't have the ability to function, make good make good decisions, etc. So I feel like everyone needs to be aware of not just being annoyed by having someone in the house who is snoring, but also really thinking carefully about what to do in that instance to help that person's health. If you have a child who's snoring, that evaluation really should be done by an ENT, because what you're probably looking at there is tonsil and or adenoid size that's blocking the airway, and that child is snoring. And a good ENT is going to do an evaluation and let you decide, give you full information on deciding the impact that can have on your child's short-term and long-term health. There is some evidence looking at snoring and ADHD because, again, in a child who's snoring, you are not allowing the brain to go into that deep sleep and repair and purge and eliminate the brain fog, and therefore it has both a short-term impact. Now, in some children, they can outgrow that situation, and I believe that there is, not my area of expertise, but I do feel like regardless of whether you're an adult or a child who has a snoring concern, it needs to be evaluated because changes in addressing that can be good for your overall health. Oh, this is a good question. Can exercise in the evening cause sleep disruption? It depends. It really depends on what kind of exercise we're talking about, and as that term exercise has kind of broadened over time, if you're talking about a gentle yoga within a few hours of bedtime, no. But if you're talking about going for a run at 9 when everybody's finally in bed and your spouse is home, probably so if you're trying to go to bed within a few hours. I'm not familiar with all of the research that's out there, but I do know there's some evidence that suggests highly aerobic activity and stimulating activity can interrupt sleep. Another question we have here is that my child doesn't have an issue falling asleep, but often wakes up crying and cranky for 20 to 30 minutes. I think this is something that we deal with pretty regularly. And I would, again, look at that melatonin-serotonin pathway, and that's why I mentioned timed release supplements primarily, because if the issue is they're not converting or they're not producing enough to be able to stay asleep throughout the night, choosing a low-dose timed-release supplement can help them stay asleep, not just fall asleep. So that would be the first thing I would think about. The next thing I would think about would be the magnesium that I mentioned, because that's supportive of that. One thing I didn't mention is something that a lot of families with younger children that we see find beneficial is just a topical, something called Badger Balm, which is a calming balm, I guess, that can be rubbed on the stomach and on the chest at bedtime. That also is just a relaxing experience for the child, but also has some of those herbs in it that I mentioned that can be promoting sleep as well. Another question we have is, what's the best strategy for relaxing if you're stressful before bedtime? And I think that's an individual answer, honestly. I think that we have to define what that is for ourselves. And it could be meditation, it could be music, it could be reading. The things I would steer clear from are, believing that watching something on Netflix, for example, to try to relax and go to bed, it might relax you, but it will also stimulate the parts of your brain that will make it harder for you to fall asleep. So from a stress perspective, if you want to relax and avoid that stress, do that, and then shift to something else to promote sleep. I think there are a few more questions coming in right now. Let's see. Can you oversleep to make up for lost sleep? Well, the research tells us no. The research says if you lose sleep, so if you're up really late, or you've traveled and you're getting in really late, or you've got to get up really early, the answer is get back onto your routine as soon as possible. If you feel the need to sleep, you're not making up for sleep, you're just exhausted. But getting back to the routine is the most important part of that. Another question we've had is about how do you increase the quantity of melatonin that you're using, or do you need to increase the quantity of melatonin that you're using if you're not sleeping? Again, I would say the first part of that you want to think about is making sure that it's a timed release product that you're trying, because the timed release component is what will keep you asleep, not make you drowsy. So melatonin has been researched up to, many, many times the labeled dose that you see on most over-the-counter products. And yes, it's safe to go up to a certain extent. I would follow the over-the-counter product label if you're not working with a practitioner. Otherwise, if it's something that you want to address proactively, I would work with a holistic practitioner who can kind of look at big picture stuff that we've been talking about and help you make a dosage decision for your individual needs. I think, one more question about, can you elaborate on the temperature of the room? Why is a hot room not better? And it's actually, the research bears out that the chillier a room is, particularly hitting like the 66-degree mark, which is where the research, and there's some research out there at 64 degrees, that it allows your body to rest better. I'm a little bit rusty on thinking through all the components of that, but I'm happy to send them out to you if you have a special interest in understanding room temp. I just feel like you should probably be able to Google it and put your hands on the research fairly easily, but if it's something that you're particularly interested in, I'm happy to send you the information as well. So thank you so much for your time today. I greatly appreciate it, and I will look forward to talking with you again soon. Thanks so much.